Hey everyone, welcome to a new video, welcome to my channel. My name is Maika, welcome to my hobby channel Floating in Dreams, where I like to talk about all things fashion and makeup. And in eyeshadow palette extravaganza today, we are going to be talking about my top 5, bottom 5 ColourPop palettes, because I did a top 5, bottom 5, I think about a week ago with all of my Urban Decay Naked palettes, and I thought, what is another brand that I can do this with? And I think that if there's one brand where I feel quite strongly about which ones I love and which ones I think you should skip, it's going to be ColourPop. So I thought I could come on here and do a video for you where I chat about my top 5, bottom 5 ColourPop palettes, because not all ColourPop palettes are created equal. So let's just get started. Before we get into the palettes, I do want to preface this video by saying that not all of the palettes I will be mentioning today here are palettes that I personally still own. In fact, 2 of the palettes that I'm going to be mentioning as part of my bottom 5, I have already decluttered. Even though I no longer own the packaging, I thought, you know what? I really didn't like these, so that's why I do want to put them in my bottom 5 and not just stick to the palettes I do still have in my collection, because these are the ones that I did try and I didn't like them, and I feel very strongly about that dislike for several reasons, and I wanted to share those reasons with you today. And another thing you should also know is that I did a massive reorganization of a lot of my ColourPop palettes last May, so I'll make sure to link that video in the description box down below, because I felt that a lot of the color stories that I own from ColourPop just weren't quite right for my makeup aesthetic and the things that I like to go for. So I definitely already reorganized a lot of them as well. So some of you who have been watching me for a while may actually already know a little bit what's coming. But I do hope that I can also give you some information if you're less familiar with my content to help you out and perhaps give you an idea of which ColourPop palettes that are out there I would recommend and which you can definitely buy, and they're tried and true and they're some of my favorites, and which ones I think you could pass up on. So that's another thing I want to put out here. However, if I show you a palette that doesn't look like it does on the website, I'll always make sure to put some pictures in the video to show you the original color story, because I did reorganize mine and most of my ColourPop palettes no longer have the original layout that they came with. So that's why I do want to preface that before we get into it. As with my Urban Decay palette video, because I want to end the video on a positive note, we're first going to talk about all the palettes that I would not recommend, so my bottom 5, and then go into the top 5 and tell you why I love these palettes and why I would recommend those. So I'm going to start us off with palettes that I do not own, because I think it's easiest for me in editing as well to get those out of the way first. And one of the palettes that I no longer own because I didn't really like it all that much is the Blue Moon from ColourPop. So it's their blue color story, and at the end of the day I really just enjoyed one shade, and it's the I think it's called Mary something, like it's the very gray tone shimmer in the middle of the palette, and I actually stuck that in the Blowing Smoke or Smoke Show palette, so the gray and black one that they did, because I felt it would liven up that palette a bit more. And I also felt that in the Blue Moon it suffered from what I feel a lot of the ColourPop monochromatic palettes actually suffer from, which is that the undertones in the 9 shades that you get, even though it's a monochromatic color story, don't really go together. So they often put warmer tones and cooler tones together, especially in their green palettes. And what I felt in the blue palette happened a lot is that some of it was this like really bright sky blue kind of vibe, whereas other blues were a bit murkier and a little bit more on the grungy side, and those for me just didn't really go together. And another issue I had with the palette was that out of all of the ColourPop palettes I've tried, the one I had was just really not a good quality. The mattes were really tightly pressed. I could barely get them to blend and to pick them up. So I think in my palette there was actually a little bit of a quality issue, and this is something I've mentioned on my channel before in the past, where I feel that ColourPop can be a little inconsistent when it comes to their quality between different batches. So if you happen to get a product from a bad batch, then that's it, then you're done. And I think my Blue Moon was just one of those that was part of a bad batch. I also felt that the darkest shade in the palette just wasn't enough to really give me enough versatility. I wish it would have been a little bit more of a true navy. And I felt that in this palette, the colors were just a little bit lacking. I just wanted more from a blue palette than what this palette was offering me. And that was just a little bit of a shame. And I have to say that I don't think I really have tried any other like all blue palette where I've liked all of the shades to begin with. So with blues, I think I'm just a little bit picky because I know that the Blue Moon is some of people's favorites. I watched Angelica Nukvist's video where she went over the 10 palettes she would keep in her If I Could Keep Only 10 videos video. And I think she actually put the Blue Moon in as one of the 10 palettes she would keep out of everything. And I was like, wow, that's a lot, because I really did not like that palette. So I think that the Blue Moon is one that appeals to some people, but not to everyone. And it was definitely one of my least favorite ColourPop palettes that I personally tried. Oh well. Next up, another disappointing ColourPop palette to me was the Stone Cold Fox. And actually, again, I no longer own this palette because I decluttered it, but I kind of knew this the minute I bought it, that it wasn't going to be for me. I do not love very big palettes, and the Stone Cold Fox, I believe, has 30 shades, which is about twice as many as my like perfect palette. Like my sweet spot is somewhere between like 9 and 15 shades. Like that's what I love. At least those are the color stories I usually like the best. So for me, 30 shades was going to be too much, so it was definitely a bit of a stretch. But I knew it was a cool tone palette, and everybody knows how much I love cool tones. So I knew it was a palette that I think a lot of my viewers would want me to try and to see what I like about it. And I ended up keeping a couple of shades, but I felt that there weren't enough shades in the palette to really keep the entire palette around for. So that's why I did declutter the packaging, and I only kept the couple of shades that I did like, which are in different packaging. So I'll show you the packaging in a bit. But these are 9 shades from the Stone Cold Fox that I did like. So I don't remember what they were, but as you can see, it's like the mauvey taupey shades that are in there. Another thing that I felt about the Stone Cold Fox, why I ended up really sort of confirming for myself why this wasn't a palette for me, was because it wasn't all that interesting. It had a lot of repeat shades, which is one of the reasons why I don't love these really big palettes, because I feel that you just get too many shades that are very similar once you put them on the eye. They can look very different in the pan. And in the Stone Cold Fox, something that I did appreciate is that each of the columns going up and down kind of gives you a look. So you can just use the palette like that and you have a very foolproof layout, and you've got loads of different shades. Now, this is another reason why the Stone Cold Fox wasn't necessarily for me. Out of the 30 shades that you get, I think only 9 of them were actual true shimmers, and everything else was a matte or like a sequin shade, so a matte with shimmer in it to help it blend. So I felt, since I prefer a shimmer over a matte also in my neutrals, I felt that the ratio between the mattes and the shimmers in such a large palette was just a little bit off if I get fewer than a third of that are actual true shimmers. Like, what am I gonna do with that? Like, it's just not enough for me personally. Another thing that I did not like about the Stone Cold Fox is the fact that 2 of the rows, if you open up the palette, if you were to lie it in front of you, open up the palette, it's the 2 rows all the way on the left of the palette. I should say columns, they're not rows, they're going up and down. But I felt that those 2 columns skewed quite warm toned on me. And if this is supposed to be a cool tone palette, I wanted more cool tones. Another thing that the palette doesn't really do very well is that it doesn't really focus very much on cooler tone browns. everything is sort of mauve-y or gray, but there were a few browns in it, and those are the ones that I ended up keeping, as well as a couple of taupes that I liked. But I wished it was more taupey brown leaning rather than grayish mauve, if that makes sense. So I ended up keeping most of the shades that were in the right side of the palette, and then the one or two taupes that were in the middle. But I felt that the first two columns were too warm toned, the two in the middle are too gray toned, and then you just have this like brownish and like cooler toned mauvey, plummy sort of vibe all the way towards the right of the palette, and that's what I ended up keeping most of. So for me, there were a couple of shades that I really liked, and I do really enjoy the formula of it. I think it's very versatile. If you don't own a lot of neutrals yet in your collection, I can definitely see the point of such a big palette and why people like it and why people see how they can get a lot of different looks out of it. And if you're not that experienced with makeup, the fact that each column up and down is just going to give you a look that's going to go together and you don't have to think about it, I think is what makes this palette so appealing to so many people. But for me, it was just a little overwhelming, and that's another thing that I've said a lot about larger palettes, is that I find them very difficult. Like, my brain looks at that and I sort of panic because I don't know what to do with it. So that's why for me the Stone Cold Fox just wasn't perfect, which is why it gets to go into the bottom 5. Another palette in my bottom 5 is the Blush Crush, and that's actually the packaging that I repurposed to put my Stone Cold Fox shadows in. From the Blush Crush, there ended up just being one shade that I truly loved. So remember, none of these, this is not the Blush Crush. These came from the Stone Cold Fox. And the Blush Crush was a palette I didn't buy myself, but someone sent this to me saying, hey, I think you might like to try this. It's one of my favorite ones, but on me, it was like, it was the wrong type of pink for me to make it look flattering. I mean, I could put an okay look out of it. Like, it was okay. It's just, for me, it wasn't a standalone palette, and that's why I ended up not liking all of the shades. So I ended up liking one matte, and I actually put it in the reorganized palettes that I made out of Blush Crush, Making Mauves, Menage a Moi, and Flutterby. Those 4 palettes, including a couple of shades from, I think it was the Morphe and Jaclyn Hill Vault Bling Boss palette. Those I all put together and like made 2 new palettes out of. So out of 4 palettes, I only kept 21 shades, and some of those weren't even from ColourPop. So I ended up only using 1 shade from Blush Crush to create that. And for me, the Blush Crush was just a little bit too pink. It made me look a little sickly, and it wasn't my vibe because it just didn't really go with my undertone. I'm a bit too pale for it, and I think that this can be a really nice, soft, neutrally pink kind of look for people who perhaps have a slightly warmer undertone than I do. I'm too cool toned to make this original color story work, but I think that it is pretty. It did have really good quality. I didn't have any issues with that. But this is one that I ended up just repurposing because I needed a place to put those Stone Cold Fox shadows, and I only kept 1 shade. So yeah, that's why it needs to go into the bottom 5. I already mentioned Making Mauves, and I think Making Mauves is the palette that disappointed me the most out of some of these ColourPop 9-pan palettes that I tried. Not because it didn't have good quality. I think the quality of the palette was really, really good. It's just that, again, the undertone of the shades didn't really go with my coloring all that well. I thought the shimmers in the palette were stunning. Like this, the original layout of the Making Mauves has some stunning, stunning shimmers. But at the end of the day, I just felt it wasn't perfect as a one-stop shop for all things mauve. I just ended up not loving all of the shades. So this is one that, as I already mentioned, together with Blush Crush, Menage a Moi, and Flutterby, I created a new color story. And this currently holds all of the, I think this is the more warmer toned one, or is this the cooler toned one? I don't know. One's skewed a little bit more warm toned and the other one was a bit more neutral, cool toned. I think this was the more warm toned one. I believe that these 3 shimmers I just put them in a slightly different order, I believe. They came from the Making Mauves, but I have to say it was a bit of a mess. I had so many shades to play around with that I don't remember exactly what ended up in which palette, but I believe that this is in the original Making Mauves as well as this as well, but I think some of these plums are actually from other palettes. I'm pretty sure this is from the Flutterby. But yeah, so the Making Mauves, I ended up reorganizing as well because it wasn't perfect. And I felt that, especially because I had 4 of these palettes that were quite similar, Blush Crush, Making Mauves, Flutterby, and Ménage à Moi, I felt there were a lot of overlapping shades in those as well. So especially when I put it all together, there were some shades that really like popped out at me that was like, oh, that's an instant keep. And then there were a few where I was like, I could do without it. So that's the Making Mauves, and that's in my bottom 5 simply because the undertone, it was a bit lacking. And then finally in my bottom 5 would be the Strawberry Shake. And the Strawberry Shake is another one that I really overhauled when I did my ColourPop reorganization. And I remember trying this, and out of, again, all of these monochromatic 9 pans that I had at the time, I had mostly like the colorful ones at the time, I felt that the Strawberry Shake as a standalone palette didn't really do enough for me. However, to my surprise, when I did the reorganization of all of these shades, I ended up keeping quite a few of the shades actually that originally came from the Strawberry Shake. So a lot of what's in here, I think actually these 5 shades, if I'm not mistaken, are all from the Strawberry Shake. However, like I said, it wasn't my favorite, and what I felt this palette needed, it's no longer monochromatic now that I've played around with it and reorganized it, but I've kept 2 shades from the It's My Pleasure. I believe this is Bare Minimum, and this is something like Dough something. So I kept 2 of the like more purpley shades from the It's My Pleasure, and then these 2 are from the Ooh La La, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe this is from the Ooh La La, and this is, I'm not entirely sure anymore, but I decided to keep it in a Strawberry Shake packaging because that's the most neutral one of the bunch. So I felt the shades would work out a little bit better. And so for me, the Strawberry Shake, again, it just didn't really come together as one palette. There was a reddish shade in here that I ended up switching out for one of the shades in the main squeeze. And I do feel that since these are magnetic, you can very easily pop them in and out of other palettes. So I really appreciate that I was able to do that so I can get more use out of these palettes. But the Strawberry Shake, I think that pinks, like the Blush Crush, they need something else to go with it on my complexion to really prevent it from it being too sickly. I like rosy, taupey, like Naked 3, those like neutrally like rose gold leaning kind of shades. That looks stunning on me. I have no issue pulling those things off. But brighter pinks and these like more like, I wouldn't call them dusty roses, but more like these like really true like actual pink shades, they just don't really go with my complexion all that much. And this now just really appeals to me. I get a nice bright pop of something pink in here, something to deepen it up, but I could do something a little bit more neutral leaning almost because of that shade in the middle. And then you just have a really stunning lighter shade as well for the inner corner. And the shade from the Strawberry Shake that I know for sure came from that palette is this peachy shimmer. That was one of my favorite shades in the Strawberry Shake, but I felt it didn't really go with all of the shades that were in the original Strawberry Shake. So like the Blue Moon in the original Strawberry Shake, I felt there were too many shades that didn't really go together. So I felt it wasn't that versatile. And I think that if you're just doing a 9-pan monochromatic color story, that at least all of the shades should somehow go together for it to truly be a versatile palette. So those would be my least favorite, 5 least favorite ColourPop palettes. However, I have to say that I have tried more, and I could have very easily put in the Just My Look or the Ooh La La, or something like the, what's the other one? Just My Look, the green one, because I felt they all had that same issue, that there were some shades in those palettes that I really liked. Like for instance, the ones that I ended up keeping from the It's My Pleasure and the Ooh La La that are now in my Strawberry Shake palette. those are some of the shades where I'm like, ooh, yes, but then the rest of the palette didn't really go with those shades, in my opinion. So I could have featured other palettes here, that's for sure. But the same thing goes actually for my top 5, because also in my top 5, there are a couple of palettes where I feel like that's a really good, really cool, really unique color story. But I ended up switching out some of the shades, even in some of the ones that I did really like, because there were like 1 or 2 shades in those palettes. It was like, not really. So there are a couple of palettes that I think that ColourPop did really well, that if you were to purchase them at face value and you don't have a bunch of these and you don't want to switch it around, they can still work. So those are like my honorable mentions, you could say. But there are 5 palettes, and for some reason, the number is exactly 5. There are 5 palettes that I own from ColourPop that I decided not to mess with. So these are the only 5 ColourPop color stories that I've tried. These are my tried and true, where I liked every single shade. So these had to go into my top 5. These had to go in there. How could I not feature these in my top 5? Because the other ones are almost perfect, but these are actually perfect. Now that being said, I have bought a couple of those like little square pans and the rectangular pans that they've come out with this year. Those I haven't tried yet, so that's still on the back burner for now. So this video could be very different if I've tried those in about 6 months or so. So maybe I should come back on here in like the winter time and redo this video to see if it's changed. And I also did buy 2 of the new palettes that they released this summer, which is the monochromatic teal palette, which is the High Tide, and the Cherry Splash. So those I haven't tried yet. So this top 5, bottom 5 situation, yes, I'm not gonna lie, it could change. But for now, these 5 palettes are my tried and true ColourPop palettes. So let's just get to it. And the next 2 palettes, they kind of work in my brain as a tandem. You don't need both. I'm not gonna say you need both, you really don't. But I know that a lot of people missed out on the Melt Myrte palette, and I keep saying it, if you were to own both the Baroque and the Wine and Only from ColourPop, guess what you get? About 2/3 of the Melt palette. Perhaps if, I'm not sure yet, because I haven't tried it yet, but perhaps if we were to put the High Tide into the mix as well, we might actually have a Myrte situation. But I need to come back to you on that one, because the Myrte also has these like aqua turquoisey kind of shades that lean a bit more teal. So maybe if you have all 3 of those, and to be quite honest, even if you were to buy 3 ColourPop palettes at full price, it would still be less expensive than buying a Melt palette. Just so you know. However, why do I like these individually? So it's not just because they are potential dupes for the Melt Myrte that I like these, but the Wine and Only, I mean, this is, yes, it suffers from the same thing that I've just mentioned other 9 pans also suffer from, which is that this doesn't really go with this. For me, like this is sort of like a look, like with this, like kind of this, and then like these 5, like that's sort of how it goes together in my brain. But this one I think can go in both sides, but that's like the shade that ties the palette together for me, the one in the middle. But this color story, burgundy berry kind of shades are some of my favorite fall shades. Like, I know that everybody who loved Modern Renaissance really liked those like really light shades in the left side of the palette. That's what you see everybody panning. I've got dips in the berries. I'm not gonna lie, the only shades I reach for in my ABH Modern Renaissance are the berry shades. This is a bunch, well, okay, it's called Wine and Only, so it's not strictly berry, but it's definitely more like red tone leaning. And that's another like palette that could have featured here as the main squeeze. So pinks, I don't really like on myself, but reddish tones, and especially if they're like deep and grungy like this. And that's also one of the things I love about my Marte palette. Those reds look like they won't work on me, but I did looks with those and it's heaven. And I feel that I can pull a similar look out of this, and that's why I like this. This has enough depth, enough variety that you can do a bunch of different looks. There are no weird shimmers in here. Well, maybe this one, but I just kind of think of it as a matte. But you still get enough shimmers in here to really make it work. These two may be a little bit too similar once you get them on the eyes, I'm not gonna lie. So it's not perfect, but I don't feel like I need to change anything up within this palette. Maybe once I've tried the Cherry Splash, I could maybe potentially put those two together depending on what I like. But for now, the Wine and Only is one I didn't mess with because I just really like this yummy, grungy color story so much. And then the Baroque, similar reasons. I love a good grungy vibe, and this packaging. This is one that you could just potentially buy for the packaging. I kept the box. I never keep boxes, but I kept this box because it's so pretty. And here as well. Everybody who knows me knows that on my brown eyes, one of my favorite looks to do is like a navy smoky eye. And these are like gray tone navies. It's cool toned, it's dark, it's grungy, but it's not boring. Because very often brands think that a cool tone can only be like a boring gray, but these all have something blue to them. And blue tone grays. I kept a Stila palette around for years because it had one blue tone gray. And this palette gives me nothing but blue tone grays. Like even this light shade, I'm not sure if you can see it, but it has this like really dirty, almost like stone-like quality to it. It's stunning. This is a so lovely. And then you get this really nice, deep, saturated navy that works really well. And then some of these shimmers are so interesting, especially these two here. They have this duochrome kind of quality to it. You do get a couple of like weird glittery kind of shades in here as well. I'm not gonna lie, again, it's not 100% perfect, but it has so much going for it. And if you really pack on this shade, you do get some of that shimmer translating to your lid. So it's not as if it completely blends away into nothing. So for me, the Baroque is one of ColourPop's more unique color stories, and that's why I want to celebrate this palette because it's gorgeous. But we all know that I like a good neutral. I'm not wearing a ColourPop palette today. This is e.l.f., but I'm wearing a neutral look with like a shimmer on the lid and then a red lip. Like, this is me to a T, you could say. So for me, really, neutrals is where it's at, and there are two ColourPop palettes that are neutral that I just love. Going Coconuts. I featured it in my top 10 drugstore eyeshadow palettes this weekend. I mean, for those people who don't want something that is too warm toned or too cool toned, they just want a smack in the middle neutral brown palette. Get this one. It's got stunning shimmers. This one, it's so lovely. You get enough mattes to really make it work. I do again have to say that perhaps we didn't need both of these two. Oh well. This is a little bit more cool tone leaning, you know? We get a matte to really deepen things up. We get another like sequin shade, but you could like stick to this side of the palette and put this all over the lid for something super neutral. And then if you were to go more into this side of the palette, you can glam it up a little bit and you can make it perfectly for nighttime. Even though this is one of the most boring, bland color stories on the planet, I was able to pull so many different looks out of this. And I loved every single one of them. And that's why this has to go into the top 5. Can't change it. And I just said it, you can't change it, and you can't change a winning team. If you want to buy a cool tone palette from ColourPop, I would recommend the That's Taupe over the Stone Cold Fox any time of day, because I love me a good taupe. And these are 9 shades of taupe. One of them is a bit more green toned leaning. I love me a green toned taupe. This goes with it perfectly. This will deepen up anything for a little bit more of a glam look. Here you get 4 really stunning shimmers, no weird sequiny shades. And again, did we need both of these? Like these 3, they kind of look the same, perhaps a little bit too much, but I feel that this, again, if you were to put this all in the crease, or this one perhaps, this to blend it out, and then perhaps like this shimmer all over the lid, you've got a really nice like daytime look. And then if you pull something like this in, you can make it more nighttime perfect and glam it up a little bit. It just has everything you could possibly want in a taupe palette. So this has my name written all over it. Like this palette, red lip, I'm out the door. Like this is just foolproof. And that's why I prefer something like this over the Stone Cold Fox, because I just get 9 shades. So it's super easy. Like with the Stone Cold Fox, I need to figure it out how to put it together. And you're like, oh wait, I can use the different columns. But then there's like what, 5 shades in each column? Here you just have 9 and they all go together. So it makes for much more versatile looks, in my opinion. In my opinion. So those are the 2 neutral palettes I would recommend. And then there's one, I hate to do this to you guys, but one of my favorite ColourPop palettes you can no longer get. And that is the Kathleen Light's Dream Street palette. They did a collab. This is no longer for sale. And it's a warm tone palette. So who am I, right? But then again, this like really bright pop of coral, really lovely. And I really like this in the fall time. Of course, I like the teals that you get in here, and this like kaleidoscope shade is really pretty. You get some peachiness, but if you put the warms with the teals together, you get a lovely, lovely warm toned look that is perfect for the fall time. And that's why I love this palette so much. And actually, they now do a big palette that is 30 pans. I've forgotten the name of it, but it actually has very similar shades to this. So I think you can still get this kind of color story from ColourPop, just not as a 12 pan, but as a 30 pan. So definitely have a look at their larger palettes and just look for the ones that has the teal and the coral in, and that's the one that I mean, because I'm having a complete brain fart at the moment. Can't think of the name. But yeah, ColourPop Kathleen Light's Dream Street is one of my top 5 ColourPop palettes, that's for sure. So thank you very much for watching today's video, everybody. This is it for this one. I really hope it was useful, that it can help you decide what ColourPop palettes to look into if you were looking into placing an order with them, because I know they release a lot and it can be a little bit confusing as to what is even still available from them, because it discontinues stuff really quickly too. So yeah, I hope the video was helpful, and thank you very much for watching. Please give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more by me. I make 3 new videos a week, but currently still doing 4. So I've got an extra video this week on Saturday. It will be the last extra video because eyeshadow palette extravaganza is almost over, and I'm going to end the week on a high note with my eyeshadow palette collection video. So I hope you'd like to stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.